If we keep on thinking that we are not vulnerable and that we're not supposed to be affected by what is happening, we would not come to the point of acceptance. And of course, if we don't come to that point, we will not be able to deal with or manage our mental health effectively, right? We will not be able to do that. We will not be able to manage our mental health effectively. And so we need to be able to, if we're going to, we need to be able to accept what is happening, the realities of things. We need to be able to understand that we are vulnerable as much as every other person, or every other person, regardless of our experiences, regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our profession, regardless of our beliefs. We are all vulnerable, and we all have a mental health to protect. Now, this will lead me to trying to help us really understand what mental health is, because again, mental health in Nigeria and the world in general has been plagued with a lot of misconception. And so this is also why when we talk about mental health, or when we even think about it, we try as much as possible to shy away from the consequences or the implications of mental health. And so I want to start with defining what mental health really is. What is mental health, right? And understanding this would also help us know that we all have mental health. And if we all have mental health, it means that we have something to protect. Now, what is mental health? Now, the WHO puts it as a state of well-being where everybody realizes his or her own potential. That means you are able to be the best that you can be, right? It's also that state where you are able to cope with normal stresses of life, right? You're able to cope with all that is happening, normal stresses. You're able to work productively. That's also very key, your ability to work productively and fruitfully, and also the ability to make meaningful contributions to your community. Now, that might look a lot, theoretical, when you say, oh, you know what, ability to realize your own potential, ability to cope with normal stress, ability to be productive, ability to contribute to your community. That looks like, oh, that's a lot technical. And so over the years, I've tried to break down what mental health really is. And if you think about these three things, if you think about your ability to think, if you think about your ability to feel, to have emotions, if you think about your ability to act or respond, then you're talking about your mental health. So three things, yeah? You're talking about your thoughts, you're talking about your emotions, you're talking about your response to life, your response to situations. Now, that is your mental health. And if we look at it from this dimension, or from this perspective, I'm sure everybody here will begin to agree with me why it is important for us to take care of our mental health at this point. Why? Because in one way or the other, we have responded in one way or the other by our thoughts. So with all that is happening throughout the NSAS movement, the massacre at the Lekki toll plaza, the whole looting and crisis all around, we've thought about this in one way or the other. And this has affected our emotions in one way or the other. It has also affected our response in one way or the other. And these three areas are our mental health. These are the dimensions of our mental health. Now, and so that begins to help us understand, oh, I need to take care of my mental health because I need to watch and I need to manage the way I process all that is happening. I need to watch and manage the way I process my emotions, or the way I feel about all that is happening. So on Tuesday, after the incidents in Lekki, I know a lot of people who broke down that night. Personally, as a therapist, I was trying to work with a lot of people and trying to manage my emotions and so on. And it took me late at night to really start to feel it. I couldn't sleep till late 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And I realized that I couldn't sleep until I came to that point where I had to force myself to cry. And it was at that point when I was able to cry that I fell asleep. And this is me thinking about every other person. This is me thinking about what we are all going through. I know a lot of therapists, my colleagues that reached out to me and said, oh, Chris, I need help. I need to talk to somebody. Because our mental health has to do with these three things: what we think, how we process all that is happening around us, how we feel, and most importantly, what we do about the situation, right? What we do about the situation. And when you start to look at it from this perspective,
And you can't. You have to ask the host. Don't be asking such one.
Hello? When you start to look at it from this perspective, you start to realize why it's important for us to pay attention to our mental health. Now, before I go on, I want to quickly share or point the torch to the statistics. And one reason why I'm setting this foundation is so that we do not see ourselves as weak, or we do not see ourselves as different, or there's something wrong with us because we're experiencing any form of distress at this point. Now, if you look at the statistics on our screen, the statistics actually puts it that in 2017, about 7 million Nigerians are experiencing depression, for example, and about 5 million experiencing anxiety. Now, these are types of mental illnesses or disorders, right? Now, when you forward from 2017 to that, 30% of Nigerians as a January mental health issue or to even find out that this number has quadrupled from January till now, following the COVID-19 incident and the NSAS movement as well, and everything happening in the country at the moment. And this begins to help us understand that, see, we are not alone. And I need to emphasize that you are not alone. Whatever your emotions are, whatever your thoughts are, whatever your responses are, whatever you are feeling at the moment, I want you to know that you are not alone, right? And so with this knowledge, the question is, what are the things that would prevent us from getting help? Very importantly, it is the barriers to mental health care are the stigma attached to it. The fact that some of us have this perception about mental health. And that's why the first part of this presentation, I had to talk about why. I have to talk about what mental health is. Why? Because I'm trying as much as possible to bring down the barrier of stigma, to bring down the barrier that says that those people who experience mental health conditions or challenges are weak, to bring down the stigma of the spiritual aspect of mental health cases, right? Yes, the cost of mental health care is also, on the high. And that's why in this session, I'm going to talk about some of those practical things that you can do on your own. And yes, even though talking to a professional is not something that we would underestimate, but we need to also know some of those practical things that we can put in place by ourselves. In addition to that, the barrier to accessing skilled professionals is also a problem, right? It's also a problem. Now, luckily for us, there are a lot of movements, there are a lot of organizations that have come out to say, you know what, if you want to access free psychological care, reach out, right? And so we need to be able to know where and how to reach out to those organizations. Also, because a lot of us do not even understand the warning signs of mental health conditions. And so when we begin to experience these symptoms or these signs, we are either attributing them to spiritual reasons, to spiritual issues, or we are attributing them to physical or medical issues. And this could be rooted to the fact that the African vocabulary does not accommodate mental health issues. And so you will see someone saying that they're having peppery sensations, heat in the head, headaches, stomach pain or abdominal pains as a way of expressing their mental health concerns or their mental health issues, right? And studies have shown this, that, because our brain is looking for a way to express our need, and we do not have the vocabulary to express this, it could find that expression in physical symptoms or physical concerns. Now, what is the effect of a crisis on our mental health? I need to first state that when we are faced with a crisis, our brain steps in to help us cope, right? Our brain steps in. Our brain wants to help us deal with the situation. Our brain wants to help us survive. Our brain is designed with that survival instinct to help us cope with a crisis. And I'm sure that some of us would have started seeing some of these things happen already. A lot of us have started looking for different coping mechanisms. If you are somebody who is very social media savvy, or if you're somebody who even follows social media like the WhatsApp status, your Twitter, you will see that between yesterday or between Tuesday and now, there have been a lot of jokes and comedy relief, on social media. People are trying to find that escape, and this is the working of the brain. This is one of the ways that the brain helps us survive. It looks for coping mechanisms. But we need to really understand that how does this really affect us? And on my slide here, I'll be talking about the fight, flight, and freeze response. That every time we are exposed to stress or every time we are exposed to a crisis, your brain thinks about this. What can I do? Should I fight back, right? Should I run away? Should I, and then the freezing response is usually, all these responses actually are autonomic responses. That means they are involuntary responses. And they are always determined by, one, your personality. They are determined by your previous experiences. They are also determined by the severity of the crisis, right? How severe the crisis is. Now, some people might fight back. And one of the ways we can fight back is through using coping mechanisms. We can also decide to run, and some coping mechanisms that offer forms of distraction could also be that way that we try to run away. Let's even avoid. Some people don't even want to hear anything that relates to the crisis. Now, while some others just freeze, they are helpless. They don't know what to do. They are confused and helpless. They don't know what to do. Now, let's quickly take our mind back to the most recent traumatic event, which is on Tuesday. The killings in the toll plaza in Lekki. You realize that the next thing that happened the next day was that a lot of people came out to fight back, in quotes, right? So they started vandalizing, and people might have said, oh, why are they vandalizing things? Why are they doing this? But what they don't understand is that this is the brain's way of fighting back. Now, some of us that were not able to go out on the streets and fight or destroy things or do anything, you realize that there was a lot of aggression as at Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, a lot of aggression. People were angry. People were just, thinking of different ways. You see that even on Instagram, on Twitter, a lot of people were retweeting and tweeting posts that were offensive in one way or the other. So, either calling out people, abusing people. These are people that naturally would not have done things like this. But because they had come to that point of aggression, they had come to that point of fighting back, and it's an instinct. Some other people just tried to run away, right? And so these are the ways that the crisis affects our mental health or our brain. At the other extreme point where we are not able to cope effectively, this could lead to mental health breakdown. So some people would experience low moods, for example. Some other people begin to experience anxiety, for example. Some other people begin to think about begin to have suicidal thoughts. Others begin to think about, how do I cope with this? They have panic attacks. And I saw a lot of this between Tuesday and now. A lot of people have had panic attacks. Some other people might, begin to experience conflict within their relationship. So they find themselves displacing, getting angry at their spouse, getting angry at people, and they don't know why. They find themselves getting moody, so they are sad. Some other people might have even turned to violence or substance use. But these are ways that the crisis that is happening around us would affect our brain, would affect our mental health. And so the question is, what do we do? A lot of times, the brain would enter what we call a survival instinct, an instinct to survive. I want to survive. And I think the best way for us to understand this instinct is to look at the grief circle, right? Let's look at the grief circle. Now, what is the grief circle? What does the grief circle really talk about? Now, this is a prediction of how our brain works when we are experiencing significant loss or significant loss, basically. Either you lost somebody or you were not able to meet an expectation. Now, this is a way of looking at it, that we will start first by denying the situation. We don't want to tell ourselves that it's not true. right? We want to tell ourselves that it's not true. And this could happen in different ways. So I saw somebody put up something on a social media platform, and the person said that I feel like we are all asleep and dreaming, right? That maybe when we wake up tomorrow morning, we'll realize that all these things are not true. And this is that person's way of trying to deny the situation. He's trying to deny that, no, I don't think this is real, right? Some of us might have thought that there's something wrong. This is not just happening. That could just be our space of denial. Now, some others might get to the point of getting angry, really angry about the situation. And some others might get to the point of feeling really depressed. They feel sad. They feel sad about what is happening. And some others will get to a point whereby they start to bargain and start to think that maybe if we do this, maybe if we can just do this, maybe things will change. And they start to bargain. Now, the final stage is the stage where we come to accept the reality, right? We start to accept the reality and then do something about it. Now, some of us, there is no law that states that we will all have to go through this phase. There is no law that says that, you need to go from denial to anger and then from anger to depression. And so a person can even skip denial and go straight to acceptance. Some other people might just go straight from denial to depression. Some other people might just begin to bargain from the onset. And some people might not even go through all these stages. They might just go straight to acceptance. Or some people might even be stuck at the depression phase. But this just gives us a picture of how we try to survive through a crisis. I'm going to quickly paint a picture with the brain and how the brain works, but I'm not going to go too technical so that I don't bore you with jargons. Now, the brain is divided into different parts. There is the front part of your brain, of our brain, which is called the frontal lobe. That is the part that enables us to think, enables us to have emotions, to engage in what we call executive functioning, the cerebrum. Now, there's the back part of the brain, which is the midbrain, the brainstem, for way of understanding. Now, that is the part that kicks in at the point of trauma or the point of the crisis. It is called the survival brain. Now, the survival brain will do a lot of things. When I talked about the fight, the flight, and the freeze response, one of the things that the survival brain will do is that it shuts down every part of our body that is not needed at that particular time. It enters what we call a sympathetic system. It tries to sympathize with you. It tries to sympathize with us and initiate some responses. So you might find out that your heart starts to beat faster. You might find out that you start to think a lot. You have a lot of thoughts going on in your mind. You're thinking about it in different ways. And you're wondering, why am I having all these thoughts? Why is my heart beating so fast? Why am I not able to sleep? Why am I not able to eat? Because your survival, why this happened? In standing in front of a lion. Or imagine you are standing in front of or you are in the house and somebody tells you that the house is on fire. Now, you are about to eat. You are just prepared, very delicious fried rice and chicken, whatever your favorite food is. And you're just about to eat. And somebody told you that, oh, you know what? A lion just entered the house. Or the house is on fire. You would notice that at that particular time when you heard this news, the last thing you are thinking about is eating your food. That's the last thing you're thinking about. The moment you hear this, what you want to do is to escape that situation. That's what you want to do. I want to escape. I want to survive. And this is the function of your brain. This is the function of your survival brain. Immediately, it finds itself in a crisis situation. The survival brain shuts down every part of your body of functionality that you don't need. Appetite, for example. So we say that your whole stomach region, it shuts down your, some of your other instincts that you don't need, like sleep and the likes, because it needs to fuel the other areas that you need. For example, you need to think about how to survive this situation. You need to think about how to escape the situation. You need to be able to run if there's a need for it. You need to be able to, all those things. You need to be able to run. Your heart beats faster. Why? Because it needs to supply blood, oxygen, and nutrients to all the other parts that are functional. And this is why you notice that some of us that might have experienced some of these symptoms from when all these things started on Tuesday, this is why we've been experiencing that. Because our brain is trying to make us survive. And so rather than thinking that, oh, something is wrong with me, I want us to see it more like, oh, okay, I'm fine. My brain is trying to help me survive. Now, but where does the problem come in? The problem comes in because our brain sometimes is not trained or equipped to survive effectively. And that is why a session like this helps us learn the right skill to be able to cope in a crisis. What do we do? How do we help our brain better? How do we help our brain recover? How do we help our brain survive better, right? And this is why we're having this conversation today. We're going to be talking about that as we go on, but I need to quickly point out that some of the other ways that we are affected, like I mentioned earlier, is that our stress level increases. We begin to feel depressed. And so I'm going to quickly talk a bit about all of these things. I'm going to talk a bit about stress. I'm going to talk a bit about depression, anxiety, trauma. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the faulty coping skills that we might be using. So quickly, stress. Now, when I was defining mental health, I said that mental health is your ability to cope with normal stress of life. And that means that stress is supposed to be a natural response when we are faced with a threat, right? When we're faced with a threat, stress is a natural way that you respond. It is a normal physical process. It is not a disease. It is not an illness. However, when our ability to cope with the stress does not match with the level of stress, then you find out that it becomes a problem. It becomes a problem. We start to feel overwhelmed by the event. And like I said earlier, like I mentioned earlier, the reason why some of us are experiencing what we're experiencing right now is because we've not faced something like this before. We have never been in a situation like this. And so we were never prepared for situations like this. Now, this also goes back to COVID-19 pandemic. Coming into 2020, a lot of us had great expectations, great, plans, only for us to get into 2020 and boom, we were hit by a pandemic. We didn't prepare for it. And so we were not equipped with the required coping mechanisms to handle such situation. And that's why we were stressed. Oh, and then yes, our survival brain kicked in. We're trying to cope, And boom, an NSAS protest came up. Now, but when the NSAS protest came up, it came with, for some people, with positive expectations. We were looking forward to something great happening. We're looking forward to great reforms and all that. And then, boom, the hoodlums are jacked, a lot of things started happening, and then the incident on Tuesday night. And so you see that our expectations have been dashed, and we were not prepared to handle this. We're not prepared to handle this. And that is why we find out that a lot of us are overwhelmed, people are breaking down, people are feeling really stressed. The question is, so what do we do about this? Now, there are different types of stress. I'm just going to run through this. There's the positive kind of stress, because not all stress is negative, which is the eustress. There is a negative type of stress. Now, the positive kind of stress gives you that motivation. Now, some people have been able to use this situation as a form of motivation. So I woke up this morning and a friend of mine posted something on WhatsApp about what the next steps should be. And when I read what she wrote, I felt, oh, this is quite smart. And I said to her, you know what? Let us create something out of this and create awareness about this. Because, this is a good way to respond. Now, for her, this situation has created some level of positive motivation for her, right? For some other people, what they are experiencing is distress. It's not positive. It's affecting our well-being. It could lead to chronic illnesses. It could affect our mental health. And so this is the kind of stress that we need to watch out for and manage. There is also the hypo and hyper stress. Now, these are types of stress that are related to the level of workload that you're exposed to. When you're exposed to too much work or too much stress, and you're exposed to too little work or too little stress. So it could lead to hyper or hypo stress, respectively. I also need to point out that a lot of times the effect of stress on our health, both mental and physical health, is dependent on how we perceive the situation. And so if we perceive the situation as a threat to our well-being, it's likely to affect us grossly. But if we perceive it as a challenge, it creates an avenue for us to grow. That is why you find out that some of us, or some people from yesterday night after the president's speech, have started thinking about, so how do we relocate? What do we do? For them, that might just be an opportunity for growth. I saw somebody post something, the person said, oh, you know, if you're thinking of relocating, you need to start hustling, And so this is me thinking about that person. I think this person might start thinking of, how can I make money? And so what should have been a source of mental health distress is now an opportunity for growth for that person. Why? Because the perception of the situation was more of, this is a challenge, rather than this is a threat. Now, for those people who perceive it as a threat, that takes them to what we call the secondary appraisal. They will then go ahead to ask themselves, do I have the ability to cope with this threat or not? Now, if they feel that, oh, I think I have the ability, they would not see the threat as something really big. They'll see it as a low threat. And then they will look for how do they cope with it. But if they feel like, man, this is not easy, I don't think I can survive this, I don't think anything can change, then what happens is that it leads to high level of threats and eventually stress for them. So understanding the stress cycle is important for coping with crisis. Also, very importantly, is the trauma cycle. Because, this has been really traumatic for a lot of people. And a lot of times when we experience crisis, what it really does is that it leads to trauma. It leads to trauma. In some cases, what we call acute trauma, and in some other cases, what we call post-traumatic stress. Now, what is the difference? The difference is in the duration, right? So, for example, post-traumatic stress usually comes at least a month after the incident. So you will not say a person has PTSD if it's not yet 1 month after the traumatic incident. So what we are all experiencing right now could just be acute trauma, especially because this is just 1 week, 2 weeks into the incident. And so how do we respond to trauma? So a lot of times people respond to trauma by re-experiencing the event, right? Re-experiencing the event. And what does this mean? This means that they begin to have thoughts, memories, flashbacks, nightmares. Somebody said to me that, you know what, I had a dream and they were chasing me. I had a dream and, so these are ways that we begin to re-experience it. So, for example, you are seated on your own and suddenly the thoughts, the images start to flash, start to come back to you, right? You start to, all the things you saw on social media, all the things you saw on TV, you start to have a flashback. You start to think about them. You start to see them. These are ways of re-experiencing the trauma. Now, the next way is that once you start to re-experience the trauma, you feel uncomfortable. You are either getting heightened emotionally, you are sad, you are anxious, you are afraid, your heart is beating fast, you are sweating, you are shaking. Now, these are hyper-arousal. So you get hyper-aroused, right? And then you start to avoid it, avoid the experience. So some people start to avoid anything that reminds them of the experience. So, and these are ways that we can respond to trauma. right? Again, being exposed to trauma can then be a trigger for other mental health issues like depression, like anxiety, like substance use, like psychosis. And so it is important that we understand this circle, right? When we start to notice that, oh, my heart is beating faster, I am shaking. I can't stand when somebody talks about something. I can't stand when I see, clips of these situations. Now, this could just be that you are responding to the trauma. You are responding to the trauma. Again, when you are exposed to any kind of psychosocial stressor, like somebody calls you and says to you that I just lost my job, or somebody calls you and tells you that, you know what, something is happening somewhere, you find out that the moment you hear these things or you see these things, you get aroused. You respond by being, afraid, or you feel really sad, extremely sad. Some people begin to even think of hurting themselves or suicide. Some people begin to think about violence, and all that. Now, those could be signs that you are experiencing a trauma. Now, I said earlier that the way we respond to trauma for a lot of people differs. Some people might begin to experience anxiety. And that means that it is important that we understand the anxiety circle. What happens when you are anxious? What happens when you experience anxiety? It is important that we understand that anxiety is normal. Worry is normal, right? And just like stress, it could also be a form of motivation, right? It could also be a form of motivation. However, when it becomes excessive and it begins to interfere with our daily functioning, so I can't do anything, I feel numb, I can't, go about my daily activity because I am anxious, because I'm worried. At that point, it might then become a problem and you need to get help. Now, some of the ways that anxiety can manifest could be in physical symptoms. A lot of times, actually, it manifests in physical symptoms. I'm shaking, my heart is racing, my heart is beating faster, my muscles are tense, I'm feeling pain all over my body, my mood is low, I feel numb. Now, this could be symptoms of anxiety. This could be symptoms of anxiety and could be a disorder if these symptoms go on for a period of 6 months, depending on the type of anxiety, right? So it could be phobia, it could be social anxiety, it could be obsessive compulsive disorder, it could be generalized anxiety, where you are afraid of a lot of things. You're afraid of your job, you're afraid of your kids, you're afraid of everything, almost everything. Or in cases where you are just afraid of going out, or you just become afraid of color red because you saw a lot of blood. Now, so this could be different forms of anxiety. So what is the anxiety circle? And so the anxiety circle that we need to take note of is that when you then find yourself exposed to anxiety or to any trigger, you perceive danger. And then the first thing that enters your mind is that you try to run away from it. Like you try to run away from it. You try to avoid it, avoid the situation. Unfortunately, that is not the best way to respond. But you might find out that when you try to avoid the situation, you feel some relief. You feel some calm, you feel some relief. And that means that that becomes a reinforcement for you to keep on avoiding the situation. But what you don't know is that the more you try to avoid it, the more your anxiety grows. The more the anxiety grows. The question then is, what is the level of exposure that we need to allow for ourselves? Because when I say, oh, don't avoid it, does it mean that, oh, so now I need to start watching everything that reminds me of the anxiety? The answer is no. And I'm going to talk about that as we go on. That how do we respond to anxiety by limiting our exposure? How do we do that? I'll talk about it as we go on. Now, the other way that our brain can respond is depression, right? We feel sad, extremely sad. I need to mention here that sadness is not the same thing as depression, right? So it is expected that with all that is happening, that some of us will feel sad. that does not mean that we are depressed. That does not mean we're experiencing depression. Except maybe you already have that history of depression. But if you do not have a history of depression, then the fact that you feel sad doesn't mean that you're depressed. Why? Because depression, before we can say a person is depressed, they need to have some of these other symptoms. They need to experience this extreme sadness for a period of time, between 2 weeks and 6 months, depending on the type of depression. You need to have that feeling of hopelessness, helplessness, the feeling of worthlessness, the feeling of sadness, either increased appetite, decreased appetite. Now, why increased appetite? Why? Because some people can turn to food as a way to cope. They can turn to food as a way to cope. So they start to eat more as a way of coping. Some people might start to avoid food. They lose appetite. Some people might begin to sleep more as a way of coping. Some others might begin to find it difficult to sleep, right? The way it affects everybody is different. Some people begin to lose energy. They lose concentration. They feel tired. Now, these are ways through which we respond in terms of depression. Now, before a person can say that they are depressed, they must have at least 4 of these symptoms for a period of 2 weeks to 6 months. Now, for 2 weeks, the person must have suicidal ideation as well. And that's what we call major depression. Now, for somebody who does not have suicidal ideation or does not feel the sense to hurt themselves, we might then say, okay, you know what, let's look at 6 months before we can then say that this person is depressed. But regardless, if you're feeling sad because of all that is happening, it could just be the fact that you are being traumatized by the events and you need to get help. And we'll talk about how we can help ourselves. Now, what are the poor coping skills that people tend to turn to? Some of the poor coping skills is that they expose themselves to too much negative media. So, and again, sometimes this is unconscious, and I'm going to share my own experience. Now, I'm a therapist, and I understand the effect of all these things. But I noticed that between Tuesday and Wednesday, I found myself binge watching social media platforms for latest updates. So I was always compulsively on Instagram because there was a particular one of my contacts on Instagram that was posting updates, and I was finding myself going to check. Has she posted something? And even though my brain was telling me that, Chris, this is not the right thing to do. This is not the right thing to do. I still found myself doing it compulsively, right? Because it's a coping mechanism for a lot of us. But it's a poor coping mechanism. It's a poor coping mechanism. And we need to understand that. We need to understand that you will feel the compulsion to follow up updates. Go on Twitter, find out what is happening. Find out the latest. How many people have they killed? Where are they raging? You will find that compulsion to do that. Now, on the flip side, it is a kind of survival instinct. Why? Because your brain wants to be ready in case there is a crisis. However, you must learn how to check and manage yourself in that situation. So you need to limit your exposure to negative media. You need to also avoid being dependent on substance. Because again, some people might just turn to substance as a way of coping. So they drink more now, they smoke more now. And some others even rely on sleeping pills because they want to go to bed, they want to sleep. And so we need to try to limit that. We need to try to avoid being dependent on any kind of substance. We also need to avoid displacement. Right now, what is displacement? Displacement is what we call, on the layman's perspective, what we call transfer of aggression. When we find ourselves transferring aggression to people who are not the direct triggers or the direct source of our trauma or direct source of our distress, we displace, and a lot of times we find out that this happens. This happens actually. I was going to say that this happens a lot from adults transferring aggression to younger people, or powerful people transferring aggression to less powerful people. But I've also realized that, You could also find the less powerful people or less younger people transferring aggression in different ways, right? So we need to be able to avoid that. We need to be able to manage that level of displacement, right? So that we do not start to hurt our relationships, hurt our spouse because we're saying something aggressively to them, hurt our kids because we're saying something aggressively to them, hurt our parents because we're doing something aggressively to them, not knowing that it's just our way of displacing the distress that we're facing. We also need to learn how to delay our decisions. Do not respond hastily when you are under crisis or when you're facing a crisis. Don't do that. Give yourself time to breathe. Give yourself time to process before you start to act. Don't just say the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't just do the first things that comes to your mind. Before you post something on social media, before you say something on social media, you need to first breathe, think, how would this affect me in the long run? What is the implication of this decision? And also, limit your discussions about the events, about the crisis. Now, please notice that I didn't say avoid or do not discuss. I said limit. Why? Because some level of discussion is good for releasing catharsis, for releasing all the pent-up emotions. So talking about it is good, but be careful not to be discussing and talking about it every time. Because what that does is that it keeps your brain in that state where your brain keeps on thinking that it is still under the crisis. And of course, that leaves you at all those unpleasurable or unpleasant emotional and cognitive states. So you must learn how to limit the discussion about the event. And so now that we've talked about the don'ts, the question is, what are the do's, right? Now, there is a model that is called the flourishing model. It's a model that helps us flourish in a crisis. When you are in a crisis, how do you flourish? How do you overcome the crisis? And this model really talks about three things, three basic things. One, creating positive interpretations of the situation. We must learn how to interpret the situation positively. And I need to emphasize that this is done deliberately. This is not something that will just happen to you, and I'm talking from experience that this is something that I've been doing for years. But even as a therapist, I had to write a short letter to my colleagues, where I had to tell them that, what, you guys need to take care of yourself. You are humans too. But I had to do that because I realized that as a therapist, it is expected that we should be able to manage and deal with this. But it wasn't coming naturally. Why? Because the survivor brain kicked in. And so when your survivor brain kicks in, it will take your own deliberate effort, intentional effort to reverse that action. And that means that you need to be able to do these three things that are mentioned here according to the flourishing model. Number one, learn how to interpret the situation positively. And again, do it intentionally. I mentioned earlier that for a lot of people, this will just be a situation where it creates a motivation for them to start to make more money, think of how they can make more money, think of what they can do, and all that, And so you need to just ask yourself, what is the light at the end of this tunnel? Is there a rainbow in the clouds? Is there a rainbow after the storm? And you need to create that rainbow intentionally. So it's not that you will see the rainbow just appear. You'll be the one to create that interpretation yourself. Right? You'll be the one to create that interpretation yourself. So let me give an example of an interpretation. For a lot of people, and myself as well, even though for 2 days ago thereabout, I wasn't seeing any positive thing out of this, but I have been able to say to myself that this might not have gone according to how we planned it or how we expected it to go, but it has created an awakening. It has created an awakening for us as individuals and even for the government. Somebody will say to me, how? What's that? Now, I want to promise you that come 2023, anyone who is thinking of contesting is going to have 2020 at the back of their mind. You're going to realize that, wow, this happened in 2020. I need to be careful. And I'm also going to tell you that all parties will start to think about how to respond to this situation. And so, yes, you might not have gotten the desired or the immediate desired response to this to all the movement, but it has created an awakening for us as individuals as well as for the larger society. And that for me is positive. That for me is positive. And so creating positive interpretation is key. Number two, creating positive emotions is also very key. We must learn how to intentionally influence our emotions positively. Now, quickly, let me go back and remind us that when I talked about what mental health is, I said that mental health has to do with three things: your ability to think, your ability to feel your emotions, and then your ability to respond, right? Now, the first aspect of this model is your thinking, right? And we said here, try to think positively. Before I quickly talk about the emotions part of it, let me tell you the effect of thinking positively, creating positive interpretation. Now, one of the effects here is that our mental health is a function of how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive our future, how we perceive the situations around us and the people around us. This can now begin to help us know why some of us have been feeling sad, depressed, some of us have been feeling anxious, because every time you think about the situation happening and you think about the future, you are wondering that, I am in this country and all that is happening. Is there a future for me? Is there a future for my kids? And that is an interpretation that then leads to a conclusion that says, oh, there is no future. And the moment that happens, that is a negative perception of the future. And it is likely to affect your brain negatively and your mental health negatively. The other one is, if I'm saying that, oh, there's no positive future for me, I also look at myself and say that, how can I even survive this? I don't think I have the ability to survive this. That is a negative perception of myself. And so the moment I see that, I feel sad and depressed because my mental health is affected. Now, I'm also predicting that some of the things that would have happened from yesterday and today is that some people begin to look at their friends in diaspora and compare themselves to those people. So they say that, see, me, I'm stuck here. My friend is in the US, my friend is in the UK, and we all started together. And so they begin to see less of themselves. And of course, this is likely to affect their mental health as well. And that tells you the power of interpretation. Now, the aspect of the emotions has to be that you need to create positive emotions intentionally. That means you need to start thinking of things that will make you feel good. Things that will make you feel good, right? And what are some of these things? Creating time where you can, play with your kids, play with your family, would make you feel good. Now, one of the things that I've tried to do from Tuesday, because I found out that this also affected, my spouse, my wife. And one of the things that I've tried to do is that the moment I was able to get over, the whole situation myself, I've actively tried to initiate a positive environment around the house, right? Where I try to just, joke with her, play with her, play, kids like play, carry her, shake her, just to make her happy and excited, and these are ways that we can influence our own emotions. So on one end, I'm intentionally trying to help her, but I'm also trying to help myself. I also try to play with my kid, try to joke with him, play with him, it's also a way for me to create those positive emotions. Then I go on social media and I deliberately avoid all those other negative media, but focus on jokes. And that's what I've been doing. So I've been laughing uncontrollably since yesterday. I see a lot of things. Yesterday night, my wife showed me something about a woman who said she's married and she's looking for somebody who is a citizen of a foreign country, she's married, and she has a little bit of a son. And I started laughing at what does a little bit of a son really mean, you know? And that reminded me, and I told my wife that that means you too, you can also say that you have a little bit of a son, because our son is just 7 months, so it's a little bit of a son. But that is a joke, that is a comedy, but it's a relief. And it's a way to deliberately influence our emotions positively. It's a way to deliberately influence our emotions positively. And this is deliberate. Create time to play. Create time to laugh. Create time to just have fun. Create time to rest. Permit yourself to sleep. Permit yourself to do nothing. Permit yourself to eat. Permit yourself to just have fun. Now, these are ways that you can influence your emotions positively. And then, thirdly, create positive connections. Reach out to people that will make you feel good about yourself. Create positive connections. People that will make you feel good about yourself. People that when you talk to them, they're not going to tell you how bad things are. Rather, they will be able to give you that motivation to want to push. Those are the kind of people you want to surround yourself with at the moment, right? People who, we call them the positive connections. Now, I want us to do something before I leave this slide. I want us to pick a book or a paper, whatever you have, a journal, a jotter, whatever it is, get a pen and write down the names of 3 people. The names of 3 people. One of them is anybody that when you think about them, you smile. Just write down the name of that person. Anybody. You don't need to talk to the person, but once you just think about the person, you smile. In my own case, my son and my wife, they fall in that category. But okay. So like I said, just get a jotter, get a piece of paper, write down the names of 3 people. One of them should be somebody that when you think about the person, you just smile. Person just makes you happy. For those of us who are in love, so this is the time that you start writing out the name of that girl or that guy that just gives you butterfly in your stomach. Just write down that name, right? Now, number 2, the second person is the name of any person who, when you are in a fix, you can call that person and talk about it, and the person can give you solutions, right? Write down the name of that person. And then number 3, that person who, when you talk to the person, you don't need to be, you can just call the person and talk, and you guys can just talk about irrelevant things. But, when you are done talking with that person, you feel lifted. Write down the name of these 3 people. 1, someone that when you just think about the person, you are happy. 2, someone when you are in a fix, you can call the person and you will solve the problem. And then 3, somebody who, when you talk to the person, if you were down before, you feel lifted. And these are the kind of 3 people that you need to connect with during this period. And so you can make sure that at least you connect with 1 out of these 3 people every day, right? Try to do that. I also want you to write on that piece of paper or that book or the journal that you have with you, the list of things that you can do to make you happy. A list of things that you can do to make you happy. Things that you can do to lift your mood. So, for example, I can play video game. For example, I can talk to somebody. For example, I can just watch comedy. For example, I can learn a skill. For example, anything that makes you happy. I can read a book. I can take a nap. Whatever it is, just do a list of all these things. And then finally, I want you to do a list of the things that you are grateful for, despite all that is happening. A list of the things that you're grateful for, despite all that is happening. And again, the list can be endless, but I always say start with a small list. Start with a list of 3, right? Start with a small list. You can keep on growing this list. Now, the dynamics about this is that when you write down these 3 things that you're grateful for, despite all that is happening, you don't just write them down. Write down why you are grateful for them. So I'm going to take it again, starting with the last one. I want you to do a list of the things that you are grateful for, despite all that is happening. A small list is fine. A large list is not bad. So a minimum of 3, and then as much as possible. But when you write down these things, write down why you are grateful for them. That despite all that is happening, I'm still grateful for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then why are you grateful for all of them? I also said, write down a list of the things that make you happy, that when you do them, you are happy. When you engage in them, you feel good. Ice cream is one of those things. Pedicure is one of those things. Manicure is one of those things. A massage is one of those things. And for some of us that are of age and are legally licensed to, sex is also one of those things, right? So you could also write these things down, right? Write them down. Write down all those things that make you happy, that can make your mood feel good. And then, like I said, write down a list of 3 people that make you, one, that when you think about this person, you are happy. Number 2, or when you think about these people, so you can write more than one. When you talk to them, you feel good. And number 3, when you have a problem and you talk to them, you get a solution. Write down this list. And like I said, try to go over this list every day. And then also try to engage with at least one out of all the people that you listed out. Also, try to engage with at least one of these activities every day. And these are one of the ways that you can flourish. These are ways, that you can flourish in a crisis. Now, I'm going to quickly run through other things here, other suggestions, and I'll round up. Do not deprive yourself of a healthy diet. Eat well as much as you can afford to. Eat well. Manage your expectations. Do not expect anything out of the ordinary. Be compassionate, be self-compassionate. Have that compassion for yourself. Don't be too critical on yourself. Yes, a lot of things have happened, that are not within your control. Somebody might be saying now that, if I'd known, and somebody had been telling me to travel out, I wanted to leave this country. Why didn't I leave if I'd known? It is you being critical on yourself, right? And so don't be critical on yourself. If there's anything you couldn't do, if there's anything you failed to do, don't worry. Accept that, oh, yes, I didn't do this. And then create a plan of response, right? Don't beat yourself up for this. Just create a plan for response. Invest in yourself. Read if you're somebody who reads. Learn a course. Just do something that helps you feel empowered, right? And exercise. You can exercise in different ways: through dancing, through walking, running, boxing. Especially for trauma, for people who feel traumatized. Physical exercise, defensive exercise, self-defensive exercises like boxing, wrestling are one of the ways that you can cope. Yoga is also very good. Yoga and so on can also help. And if you're experiencing sleep difficulty at this point, you need to be able to maintain a good sleep hygiene. And what is this basically? A sleep good hygiene are a list of things that you need to do and the things that you shouldn't do. So, for example, avoid caffeine, avoid alcohol, avoid carbonated drinks, avoid spicy food at least an hour before bedtime, right? Avoid them an hour before bedtime. One of the other things that you can do is that use your bed for only 2 things: for sleep and for intimacy. Don't do any other thing. Don't operate your phone on your bed. Don't watch television on your bed. Don't do social media. Don't operate laptop. Just do only 2 things on your bed: sleep and intimacy. You also need to be able to design your room such that it is cool and calm and relaxing. So use a calm bulb, color green, blue, anything that is calm enough. Reduce the intensity of light to your room. And then if you find out that you cannot fall asleep in the first 15 minutes, don't stay there. Stand up, go somewhere else, and then either write down your thoughts or just do something boring, something that normally when you start doing, you fall asleep. And I think this would help you. If you still have difficulty sleeping, at least after trying this for 3 days to a week, please reach out and speak to a professional, right? You can also create a routine, the time when you go to bed and time when you wake up, because that helps you. That also helps. Exercise is good, but avoid exercise minutes before bedtime. So if you want to exercise, at least exercise 4 hours before bedtime. This would help you improve your sleep hygiene as well. And I also want to talk about, I talked about this already, gratitude, creating a gratitude list. And I said, this is intentional. Think about things that you're thankful and you're grateful for. And you can do this by playing the glad game where you say, oh, you know what, I'm glad that I'm alive. I'm glad that, you know, I'm with my family. I'm glad that, you know, whatever it is, but just something that you're grateful for. And then also create a relaxation routine. Create a relaxation routine. So, for example, you can decide to journal. And I said here, journal everything. Journal everything. Journal your thoughts. Journal your emotions. Journal your gratitude. Journal your plans. Write them. Why do you have to write these things? Now, because writing helps you see it from a rational perspective. Now, when you write your thoughts, when you write your emotions, when you write your plans, when you write the things that you're grateful for, you are less emotionally affected by these things, and you are more rational. Now, let me quickly show you the advantage of journaling. I don't know how many of us here, when your friend has a problem and they come to you, you always have the solution to the problem. You will give them the solution. And some of you even now think that, you know, maybe you can even start a profession as a therapist or as a counselor, right? Because you've been giving them solutions. But do you notice that when it's your turn, you find it difficult coming up with solutions for yourself? And that is because you are emotionally invested in the situation. And so you are not thinking about it or looking at it rationally, right? Now you need to go back to that your friend who is now able to give you the solutions, right? And so journaling helps you look at it from the third person's perspective. I would also talk about deep breathing exercises. Take out time to breathe. Breathe in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth. Do it often and often until you feel relaxed. Create time to stretch, you know, exercise. Prayer and meditation is also very good. You know, create time to pray. Whatever you believe in, create time to pray. Create time to meditate. So whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you believe in the universe, you believe in Buddha, whatever it is, create time to communicate, to pray with that higher power. Meditate on positive things. Meditate on, you know, positive things generally, because that way you can find that inner peace. Then listen to good music, relaxing, soothing music. Also create time to laugh. Create time to laugh, right? Manage stress very effectively. Be calm. You know, take it one day at a time. Learn to say no. You know, at this point, you know, you don't need to keep on pressuring yourself with a lot of things. Relax, be calm, say no to a lot of things. Say no to things that, you know, might be stressful, might be too much for you. Learn to share your work. Learn to plan your activities. Learn to schedule. Learn to track your progress. And importantly, learn to celebrate yourself. I would also end by saying that you need to also learn how to reach out to people. Reach out to people. It is not a sign of weakness to ask for help. So if you're feeling distressed, if you're feeling that you cannot cope, call somebody. Someone on that your list, call that person and talk with that person. Just do something. Talk to somebody, reach out to somebody. If you can talk to a professional, also do that. And then I'm going to say this, that it's important for us to know how to help our loved ones during this crisis, right? And I'll start by saying that even though we need to help them, but I want us to understand that it's not, whatever they are going through, we are not responsible for it. Now, this might sound a little bit insensitive, but it's a fact. You are not responsible for what is happening to your loved one. So that you don't start to see yourself as that Messiah. That if I don't solve this problem, so eventually you start to feel distressed yourself. And so you must understand that it is not your responsibility, but you can help them. So offer them support. And when you try to offer them support, don't impose on them. Give them the option to choose how you can help them. Don't tell them that, oh, I must do this for you. No. Ask them, how can I help you? How can I help you? They might tell you, no, don't worry, I'm fine. Don't worry, I'm fine. Don't worry. Just tell them that, okay, in case you need to talk or in case you need help, in case there's something I can do, please reach out. And I'm sure that when they get to that stage, they'll reach out to you. Also, you can also point them to professional help. Point them to where they can get help. You can tell them, okay, you know what? In case you need to talk, or in case you feel like talking, I would like you to talk to this person, or I would like you to talk to this therapist. Just point them to where they can get help, right? But like I said, remember that you are not the cause. You're not the one responsible. When you're offering help, don't impose your help on them. Give them the option to choose and to tell you how you can help them. And also learn how to point them to the right direction, or the right source of help. And then I need to also emphasize, try to be confidential. You need to be confidential, right? Because one of the problems that people face and why people don't like to share or reach out for help is because they are afraid that if I come and tell you now, you got to tell other people. And so be confidential as much as possible, and don't be judgmental. Don't be judgmental, right? Don't be judgmental. Understand that we are all humans. We are all vulnerable. The fact that a person is experiencing a breakdown or going through a crisis doesn't mean that they are weak, because it can happen to us, like I've explained over time. Our brain is equipped to help us survive. Our brain is equipped to help us survive. But cases where we're not able to survive effectively because we didn't prepare for the situation, it is okay to ask for help. I think I will round up by saying this: it is okay to ask for help, right? Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It is okay to ask for help. So if there's any of you who is distressed and needs to talk, please feel free to reach out, and I would say thank you.